Welcome to Spindle and Spoon Homestead, your place for simple living and hand spinning. In today's video, I'm sharing natural dye pigment watercolors. Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I am really excited to share this project that I've been tinkering around with this summer, and in fact it's been in the works for a long time, and it is natural dye pigment watercolor paints. So join with me and we will make some together. This will be my second time making some, so I'm definitely not an expert, but I found it to be pretty easy and it turned out to be pretty great results. So what I've already made so far is some yellows and pinks and purples. And these were made from cochineal and cochineal plus iron, and also some weld for the yellow. So cochineal makes reds, purples, and pinks, and weld makes yellows. And you can see some of them kind of cracked a little bit, so as I said, I'm definitely not an expert here. Supposedly you can, get these to work a little better if you get a better medium, which is what I'm going to explain later. But they still work as watercolor paints, so it's okay. And I'm just learning. But what you're going to need is some pigment from a natural dye bath. And I'm not going to demonstrate that in this video. I might make another video separately for that process at another time. But you can find the instructions on the Botanical Colors website on their blog. And that's what I read, and then I just did it, and it wasn't that hard. It was pretty easy. I had success with that. But basically you can take any dye exhaust bath and go through this process that involves alum, I think it was alum, and it will bind to the leftover pigments that are dispersed in the water, even if there's not very much, and settle at the bottom of the pot, and then you can pour off the excess water and strain out those pigments that are settled on the bottom of the pot and dry them out, like with a coffee filter or something like that. So that's what I did over the winter with several of my exhaust baths. I don't know about you, but whenever I'm natural dyeing and I have a pot at the end and I've dyed all of my things, but the pot still has color in it, and I'm like, no, I can't throw this away. I don't want to throw it away. And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just find something else to throw in the pot. But with this, you can get like pretty much every last little bit of dye out of the pot and use it to make this dried pigment. And I've got examples of the pigments in this jar and in this jar. These are from acorns, and I think one is just acorns and one is acorns plus iron. Honestly, I don't really remember. So in theory, one of them should be black or gray or a really dark brown, and one of them should be more of a tan color. So we'll see. And if you grow your own indigo, you can make watercolor dye from this pigment, because the process for extracting indigo pigment leaves you with a pigment powder. So you don't have to go through the same process as when you have an exhaust bath of like cochineal, for example. You already have the pigment right here, and it's ready to use to turn into watercolors. So the next thing you need besides the pigment is the watercolor medium. And I made a little jar of that the other day when I did my first trial of this. And there's lots of recipes on the internet, and like I said, this did crack quite a bit, so I might need to tinker with it more at some point, but I'm probably just going to use what I have because it's fine. But basically, most of the recipes involve some combination of the following. There's gum arabic. Usually you buy it in a powdered form that you mix with hot water to make a kind of sticky, syrupy, jelly kind of solution. You also need glycerin and honey, and these things make it thick and sticky as well. I'm honestly not sure what these things do. I kind of like chemistry, but not the detail part of chemistry, I guess. So I am like, if something says that this will work, then I do it and it works, and I'm like, good. I don't really know how it works. But if you're into chemistry, this could be really, really fun for you. And then you also put in some clove oil as a preservative, and that is your watercolor medium. So the recipe that I did was 6 tablespoons of hot water mixed with 3 tablespoons of gum arabic powder, and you mix it until it's all nice and dissolved. Then I added 1 tablespoon of honey and 1 tablespoon of glycerin and a drop of clove oil. And that gave me quite a bit. I was able to do several watercolor pans. So let's do the next part. There is some equipment that you need. You're going to need a glass muller. That's this glass little knobby thing that's kind of frosted at the bottom. And you're going to need a glass plate that is frosted. It gives it a little bit of grit. And you're going to need some various palette knives, although you could use other tools like just a butter knife probably, but the palette knives are offset, so it's really nice. You also might want a mortar and pestle if your pigments are still pretty grainy like mine are. They should be more of a fine powder when you start mixing it with the medium, but mine are more grainy. So we're going to go ahead and put these in the mortar and pestle and grind them a little bit. I neglected to mention that my daughter and I were wearing face masks behind the scenes here. Anytime you're working with fine powders of any kind, you want to wear a face mask so you don't breathe in those fine powders, because those are not good for your lungs. And I'm going to get my little knife and make a little depression there. You can see it's still quite grainy, but that's where the mulling magic helps. So I'm going to add in, it's very different for each pigment. I'm just going to start by filling up this little well here. I think it's roughly like 2 to 1, 2 parts pigment to 1 part medium. But you can always add a little more. And then you just start mixing it in. And this part can take quite a bit of time, depending on the pigment. I feel like this one's going to take a while because it's really hard to grind up. Okay, once it's all mixed, you can switch to the muller. And basically you just swirl it around. You're grinding the pigments so they're even finer. Alright, I am at a point where it's definitely still a little bit gritty, but I've been doing this for quite a while, and when I test it, it's pretty good. It's got some grit, but I think it looks cool. So, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not a professional. I think I'm going to be happy with this. You can see how far it's come. This is our first test with the large bits of grit, and then getting a little finer as we test. It's a really nice color too. At this point, all that's left is to scrape off your new watercolor paint paste stuff and put it into some kind of a pan. You could use a little watercolor paint pan, you could use a little seashell, a bottle cap, whatever you'd like, just a little container to hold your paint. So I finished my brown paint, and I decided to make some blue paint with my indigo pigment. I got out some chunks of indigo pigment and put them in the mortar and pestle. I found the indigo pigment to be much easier to grind up really fine than the acorn pigment. I got a fine powder within just a minute or two. Next, I added some of the watercolor medium and mixed it in. And I ended up making a much more liquidy paint for this experiment. I'm not sure if it was just the difference between the acorn pigment and the indigo pigment, or if I actually added more, like a little more of the medium, but it was much more liquidy. If you saw in the part a couple minutes ago when I was scooping the brown paint into the paint pans, and it was very pasty. This blue paint, was much thinner and more liquidy. It ground up really fine very quickly, so I went ahead and tested some. And it was very deep blue, absolutely beautiful. So I went ahead and put it in the pans. Even though it was so liquidy, I thought maybe this will prevent it from cracking if it has more of the medium in it and it starts out more liquidy. Like I said, I am not an expert at this, and I feel like each time I do this, it's another experiment. So in the end, I ended up with my yellow and purple ones that are cracked, and the brown ones also cracked a little bit, although not quite as badly. And the blue ones were beautiful. They didn't crack at all, and they had kind of a glossy look compared to the other super dry looking colors. So far it was a success, and my daughters and I decided to try the paints. I went ahead and wet my whole watercolor paper with water first, and I wanted to see how the colors would blend together. Since I had a pinkish red, a yellow, and a blue, I wanted to see if I could get a full rainbow. And what I found was that with these super dry pigments, even though they tested, when I was molding them, they tested really richly colored, after they dried, they were very pale. And so I was constantly adding more water and trying to soak the paint in the pans. And as time went on, as I was painting, it did get more saturated with water, and there was more color coming from the paint. But that was a little disappointing at first. And the blue did not have that problem. I'm guessing because it wasn't so dried out. So next time I'm definitely going to use more of the watercolor medium and see if that's the case with each of these pigments, that they need more and then they won't be as so dried up and cracked and difficult to use.
I've only done blue. I know, the only one I really much work on was yellow. You'll do what I did, I know what you're thinking. This took way less long than the digital one. Like in the digital one, I had a big setting. I filled it in, like on cat canvas, I filled it in like a minute.
As the dry paints got more and more soaked, they did work a little better. In the end, I did get my rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. One of my daughters painted a bird, and she used a lot of that brown paint that we made earlier in the video. Here's my finished painting. And my other daughter made this cute landscape painting. We had a lot of fun painting together and making watercolors together. So I encourage you to try it too if you're into natural dyes, or you can just buy natural dye pigment from a natural dye supplier. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.